Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Northern Roses podcast. Today it's me, Henry North, a freelance journalist from Manchester, and joined by my brother, Dr. Adam North.
Hi everybody.
So today we kind of wanted to start this episode off with a very serious topic, and it's a petition started by a friend of the podcast and the Northern Rose, Dr. John Mulligan. So Adam, would you like to talk a little bit about the petition?
Yeah, so Manchester-based script writer William Plastow was arrested following a Palestinian Action protest, and he in Bristol, I think it was, and he's been arrested. But the real issue is that he's waiting 21 months, or the government want to hold him for 21 months in jail before his trial. So nearly 2 years in jail before it's even decided whether he's innocent or guilty. We think this is unacceptable. Lots of other people think, and I'm sure you also think it's unacceptable. So if you do, we would love you to please click on the petition that will be attached to this, however you're seeing or hearing this, and sign the petition to have William released from prison so he can await trial at home or on bail without having to sit in prison for a ridiculous amount of time. This would be the longest time awaiting trial in prison for protest-related charges ever. Just Stop Oil, I think the record was 10 months for a Just Stop Oil protester to wait before then having their trial. So this is, I don't know, it's crazy. And William's apparently struggling with mental health, which I think we could all appreciate would be the situation waiting for your trial. You know, two years in prison, I think we'd all suffer from downhill mental health. So hopefully we can do our bit to help William get out before his trial. Yeah,
and from what I've heard as well, and I'm not sure if this is going to be the case, but they may even drop the charges when it's time for the trial. So if you can imagine what that must be like.
Yeah, and we're not going to cover Palestinian Action and Israel-Gaza here because this isn't what we wanted to do in this podcast, but we just thought we'd bring it to your attention because hopefully we can make some change, and this can be a start of making some change through you and us. But what we are going to talk about today is something that we've been pushing a lot through our articles, which is, and I think it's an area missing from the discussion about wealth tax and effectively how to fix the country, which is that currently it is seen as class warfare in a way. It's the workers, the 99%, versus the people who own all the assets, and they earn their income primarily through passive income. And this is seen as like a war where either the workers win or the asset holders win. And in some ways it is a battle, but also we want to make the case that it's in the interest of the 1% to also work towards a more equitable future. And this is based on historical precedent. This is based on a kind of environment you would like to live in. This is based on a society where things function properly and people don't go around killing each other based on different ideologies. So really what we would like to push here is how can we incentivize that 1%, the ultra wealthy, to pursue and want to contribute more to the tax to the tax burden, and how can we incentivize that? And I think the moral argument doesn't work and hasn't won. That moral argument's existed for as long as taxation has existed. You know, should the people with more bear the heaviest burden? And that argument is not going to win. Right? Clearly, it's the case that more needs to be done. And so I think what we're going to talk about now is some incentives. Like, can we think of ways that it would incentivize people who already have enough money that they don't need any more to give some of that back to the public or back to the state? And again, this isn't a question of, the state taking everything. This is a question of who pays the taxes. Because currently the burden falls on the workers and the middle class because they pay the majority of the taxes. And it's simply about redistributing who contributes the most.
Yeah, so we wanted to really look at how it may have been done in the past when maybe the tax burden was a little bit fairer, or when capital didn't really have the same amount of flights.
Yeah. And this isn't a situation of hating the ultra rich, because again, if the system is built to support you and to help you evade paying taxes, why wouldn't you? Especially if everyone else is doing it. If I'm one extremely wealthy person and I decide to increase my tax share but everyone else doesn't, that doesn't feel fair to me. And so it's understandable about why people wouldn't want to do that. But historically, there was a situation where those with the highest wealth would contribute to public projects, and they would actually see it as part of improving the environment and the spaces that they lived in, and the communities that they were part of. They saw it as part of their public obligation to contribute more. So that's why you would see parks, galleries, libraries, scientific institutions named after these very wealthy people, because they recognize that this philanthropy is key to actually maintaining a certain level of wealth. So, things in Manchester like Heaton Park or Whitworth Park, Whitworth Gallery, these names are not just random, they're named after people, very wealthy people.
My personal favourite, the John Rylands Library.
Yeah, John Rylands, so his wife donated the library.
In his memory,
to the city of Manchester. This beautiful space that anyone can go in and use was seen as part of this philanthropy. And this is not to say that very wealthy people currently don't do any philanthropy, but they don't do it in the same way. And this goes to Henry's point about the movement of capital now. So whereas in the past a very wealthy person would live in an area in their mansion with all their land, and they wouldn't really move. They would have other houses, but they wouldn't so freely move. So they wouldn't have the luxury of private jets. They wouldn't have the luxury of simply moving all of their... Well, they can't move... Again, we've talked before about how the wealthy cannot simply move all of their assets, but they wouldn't have international banking. They wouldn't have this ability to move across borders and become almost what is seen as a global elite who can move to any country and live a life of luxury there. And so there's kind of this phenomenon occurring now where the global elite do not feel attached to any specific area, and a space that they live in, they don't see it as part of their obligation to improve that community, improve that environment, improve that space. They just think, if it gets worse, I'll just go elsewhere. And this is seen with, say, Elon Musk leaving California and going to Texas, because he didn't see it as part of his obligation to contribute to the broader health of California. He was just like, well, it doesn't suit me now, I'm off to Texas.
Yeah. Joe Rogan did a similar thing.
Loads did, yeah. Texas became the new place for this kind of tech billionaire or podcast bro or media influencer. And there's a book actually that talks about this phenomenon called As Gods Among Us, which discusses the historical pattern of, in times of crisis, the ultra wealthy would actually pitch in and they would fund medical institutions, they would provide certain key steps that were needed to protect society and keep it safe. But this is starting to diminish now, to the point where the ultra wealthy, for instance, during COVID, didn't see it. In fact, they saw it as their responsibility to extract from the state rather than helping. So we have the example of Michelle Mone, who sold the government, used the VIP fast track talking to her MP friends to sell the government PPE that was just shite. None of it worked, cost the government billions. She used it to then buy herself a yacht and go on holidays. And that obviously came out in the years since, and she's been under, her reputation's been destroyed since then. But this is a massive shift, whereas we might have seen even 50 years ago, certain incredibly wealthy people would have seen it as part of their public responsibility to contribute to the protection of people, not the extraction of resources from them, not as a quick opportunity to make a buck, but actually as a as a part of their kind of mission, their service is, I have accumulated all this wealth, and now it's my responsibility to use some of it to protect those people that have helped me build this wealth.
Yeah. So we kind of really wanted to talk a little bit about, well, how would that look like in the modern day? How would someone who's sitting there going, well, I may have, or for example, what kind of incentives can you give someone that has accumulated a lot of wealth to then invest in their local community?
Yeah, and this is a question that billionaires are asking. Like, even, I think it was like 2 days ago, Mark Cuban, so a US billionaire, he was putting on social media, how do you incentivize very rich people like me to help the worst off in society? And like I mentioned at the start, this shouldn't be a question that needs answering. Right? There's a moral component there that I think most normal people would say, well, if you have that much, of course you would. But I think you can become quite detached from normal people when you're in a certain level of wealth. You know, they talk about this idea of like segregation, right? The very wealthiest people are the most segregated because they live in bubbles. They do not spend time with normal working people. And so actually, we might talk about certain ideas of middle-class communities, gentrifying areas maybe, and that leading to some kind of social segregation. But that's nothing compared to what the ultra-wealthy, their segregation is from everyone else below a certain social status and wealth status. So when we're thinking of incentives, I think the key thing to do is to recognise that the ultra wealthy are very competitive.
Yeah.
Like, you can, once you've reached a certain level of wealth, no more wealth is going to improve your material position, or it's not going to improve your life. Gary Stevenson has talked about this a lot. Like, realistically, how much could you spend a month? Like, how much do you reckon you could spend a month? Like, even you going all out, not buying assets, that is, just on things to do, food, whatever, like experiences. I think you'd be hard pressed to spend at most 20k a month, and that's already
it's a lot of money.
There's a lot of money. So these people are earning in some cases they're earning millions of pounds a month in passive income. They're struggling to spend that, so that's why they're buying more assets, and then it becomes a competition for who owns the most. So I think we play into that competition, right? So what you can do is you can say, well, the people that pay the most tax, that contribute the most, have infrastructure named after them. And I know that this doesn't always sit well with everyone, because you go, well, why should they have it named after them and not people who are doing great things in the community? But this situation's existed for as long as kind of the idea of Western democracies existed, where public institutions are named after wealthy people. As we were talking about before, you can go around Manchester, all these places are named after people who had the wealth to build them. And so we simply have to find a new way of introducing that back into our current system. And so I think, let's say HS2, right? HS2, why not name it something else? Why not name it after the highest taxpayers? And then you introduce a notion of competition. So actually, it's a sort of reputation washing, where those people with the highest wealth think, well, I'd love this high-speed rail to be named after me, because who wouldn't? Well, that's
it's like a place in history, isn't it?
Yeah, really? Your name remembered, and it's better than any statue, like a high-speed rail named after you. So you make it a competition. Who can pay the highest taxes? And if you pay the highest taxes, maybe you get your name on HS2, or you get your name on a leg of HS2 or a station. And these are kind of incredibly cheap ways of incentivizing the very wealthy to contribute. And that's playing on that status and reputation, that when you reach a level of wealth, the money itself is not important. It's that reputation and status. Just like a knighthood appeals so much to the ultra rich, because money at that point isn't really an issue. Like David Beckham, he wanted that knighthood for so long.
Yeah, he wanted it badly.
Yeah, he wanted it more than he wanted any of these other things, because it's that status and that reputation. So it's about allowing the ultra rich to almost reputation wash and to legacy build, but that comes at the cost of a certain amount of redistribution. And I think that's a fair trade-off to make, to say, look, because nobody wants violence, and history has shown that as wealth inequality increases, violence will follow. Because people, when their material position becomes so dire that they have no other choice but to commit crimes or to commit violence to have access to the basic necessities of life, housing, food, sanitary conditions, and fresh water. When those things are cut off, you have no choice but to pursue radical means of redistribution. And nobody wants that. Nobody wants violence. History has shown that that is good for no one. So what we need to do is we need to find, I think, reasonable, sensible, low-cost ways of trying to encourage that redistribution. And obviously it's not going to work for everyone, which is why we've mentioned as well in articles around the wealth tax, HMRC has to be empowered. And this was the case in the 1970s. In the 1970s, it wasn't even HMRC, it was Inland Revenue, used to keep a track of high net worth individuals' personal wealth. So they used to have an idea of how much people had, because that makes sense. You need to kind of be able to track how much people have so that you can tax them effectively. An article from The Guardian came out, 3 weeks ago? The government has no idea how many billionaires are even in the UK. Now, that's insane.
It is insane, yeah.
So, yeah. So we need to, first of all, we need to find out a way to track wealth. And, you know, the Sunday Times Rich List do it and Forbes do it. So clearly, you know, there are ways of doing it. And very wealthy people want everyone to know how much wealth they have, again, because of the status and the reputation. So there are ways of doing it. And then incentives need to be provided so that it doesn't become a hostile environment to the ultra wealthy. Because although, again, we don't agree, as we spoke to Joe about from Tax Justice UK, we don't agree with the idea that there'll be all of this wealth flight, but we still want the UK to be a place that doesn't have these social rifts. It needs to be, again, it's about reducing wealth inequality and bringing people closer together, but not about making an enemy of, the same way that the far right will make an enemy out of another group. I don't think it's in the interest of the left to then simply replace that enemy with some other enemy.
Yeah, and I think it's a nice sign of appreciation, isn't it? Because if you've got a person from quite extreme wealth and they're prepared to invest in their community and the area around them, to name something after them, it's a nice transition, isn't it?
Yeah,
or transaction even.
Yeah.
It's a sign of appreciation from the people to name something after someone, and it's a sign from the person who's financed it to do it in the first place. And I think that brings people together.
It does, yeah. And you know, I don't think having someone's name on something, although clearly there are historical instances where things like Cecil Rhodes and certain other historical figures who've got statues and institutions named after them but made their money through slavery, it's important to reassess that and say, well, you know, it's not just a name, it's what it carries, the legacy of slavery that those kind of people and their wealth carry with them. But the recognition that, you know, people are contributing to the public good, I think is important to do, and doesn't cost normal people very much. You know, to say, let's name this new library after someone who's contributed a lot of tax. I think you're right. It can help build community, but also it doesn't cost people very much. You know, although we might prefer it that it's named after someone in the local community who has always done good. It's important to we can find other ways to do that, but these projects, I think, if we want the funding for them, and we need to find ways to incentivize a greater way for those who have the most to pay tax to fund them.
Yeah, and it's certainly nicer than naming things after corporations, which is what we can see in football and stadiums and entertainment. But
Yeah, well, I the corporations as well. I think the thing, these naming of things after corporations is what we don't really know what the corporations are getting in return for many of these deals. Like the things like the crypto companies.
Yeah.
In the US, loads of stadiums named after crypto companies, but then the crypto, is a lot of it's done to reputation wash so that it can then exploit people and rip them off. Whereas I think if it's named after individuals, although that is again a kind of reputation washing, it's not as, I don't think it's as dangerous, because whereas corporations can often cause more harm than just an individual.
Yeah. So that is kind of really something an approach that could be taken countrywide, nationwide.
Yeah, community-wide. Yeah, because I think this, for most things, this is why we're not so, or I'm not so, I don't want to speak for you, Henry, but I'm not so much in favour of massive radical change made in an instant. I think it's often best to trial things and show through the trials that they work and then implement them. So these things will always help to start at a local level. So you could have a Manchester-based, whoever pays the most tax in Manchester to the council, to the Greater Manchester Authority, they get public projects named after them. And let's see if that has a positive effect on tax rates. Do people pay more tax if they know that there's a possibility that their name may be put on some kind of public project, or they'll get some kind of, I don't know, throwing an idea out there, but I think actually Joe mentioned it as well, is that kind of like a leaderboard or some kind of getting a letter from the mayor to say thank you for your helping of the public good, thank you for your contribution. So these all need to start at a local level. To give a good example of this, the 4-day working week wasn't just thrown out to like every company now, 4-day working week. No, it was trialed first of all in individual companies where they said, okay, it's working for say 1, 2, 3 companies. Then we trial it at a bigger level. So then you get like a whole, like massive companies like say KPMG Canada trying it, and then you get certain countries like Iceland just go, right, the whole country's going to do it now. We've seen it worked at the individual level, we saw it worked at the local level, now we're doing it countrywide. Like these things, they seem, I think if you want to do it in one go, it's risky because it might not work. That's why you start local and you limit the potential risk, and then you see what works, what doesn't work, and you build up from there. That's why a wealth tax of 2% on wealth over 10 million isn't a lot. It's a very small tax. But that's the point, is that you start small and see what happens. One of the criticisms often used about other countries saying, oh, the wealth taxes didn't work. Well, we can learn the lessons about what didn't work and then implement better ones. That's how policy works. You innovate, you find out what doesn't work and you make it better. And that's the situation we find ourselves in, is if we want to make incentives, we start off locally, do these incentives work, and then we build them up and we make them better, and we find out what didn't work and then we fix it. And sometimes it's, if you are good policy creators, you have to be prepared to say this doesn't work. Like there might be situations where it doesn't work and you have to go scrap that, do something else. But I think everyone can see that the status quo isn't working. The status quo hasn't worked for 40 years now. So we were told neoliberalism, we were told privatization would fix everything. The private sector is the answer. It will make everything efficient. Exactly. Yeah. Efficiency is key, but we've seen
productivity. Yeah,
but we've seen that hasn't happened. And we have an article on that about how the private sector efficiency bonus over the public sector is a myth. It's not true. Look at the water. Look at our water infrastructure in this country. It's been run into the ground by private companies. So yeah, we're about, I think, starting off at a local level. So I'd love to see Manchester lead the way in this, because ultimately I think that the first cities to start tackling inequality with new innovative measures will be the ones that come out on top. They'll be the cities that people want to go to move to live in, to build, and to start to invest in that community that I think lots of cities are craving now. Like, you know, these loneliness epidemics and mental health crises, that these aren't just for our cities. These are all of our cities, I think. And you've seen, Henry, the kind of real disaster that's happened to mental health in the area, which we'll get to in a second. But I think it's important to recognise that we have local issues, but our local issues are often shared by other cities, and we need to work together with other cities to see what works and what doesn't work. And this is why Scandinavian countries are a great model to say, although not perfect, they have certain things in place that we could take and use because they work.
Yeah, so you talked a little bit there about Manchester leading the way. So I did a bit of number crunching, a little bit of research into what would that look like. So what, for example, would Manchester need the money the most? So I was to hand you the key to the kingdom of Manchester, for example, Adam, and I'd say, well, if you wanted to incentivise someone to pay tax, where would you put the money? So Manchester's life expectancy is really poor. It's 4 to 4.5 years lower than the national average, and mental health illness within this region is the highest. I mean, I say Manchester, but Lancashire and the North East in particular are bad. Well, you kind of think, well, what could you then do? What could you then incentivise people to do? So one of the main reasons for poor health in general is housing. So then I looked into kind of like housing and the availability of housing, and the figures aren't really that clear, but since 1980 they say 26,000 homes have been sold from right to buy. So that's left around 18,000 households on a waiting list, which is surprisingly and shockingly a 57% increase since 2015-16. So you can kind of see that if there was to be more money available, where it should be going kind of immediately. And Andy Burnham has said himself that he came out with the slogan or something along the lines of housing is health. So there's no hiding that there's a lot of issues in Manchester, but this would be one place to start. And I'm not sure how your incentives would work, but if you wanted to make the biggest difference in Manchester, housing would be the way to do it. So maybe you could have, I was thinking maybe you could have a trust or a community service named after who would be the biggest payer into the tax system. So, for example, you could have a community-based kind of nursing, mental health carer who could come round, and that could be part of a trust paid for by the biggest contributor. Or maybe, I don't know how it would work, but a road named after them in an estate that's been freshly built.
Look at all of our streets anyway. All of our streets, pretty much all of our streets are named after people already.
Exactly, yeah.
So, people have been building houses in this country for decades, although profit motive certainly been the case in many examples, but a lot of it has also been that putting their name on it, because they would be building these streets in some cases for workers, for their factories, to work in their factories, or for people within their communities. So think of the Vernon family in Stockport. Yeah. So much of Stockport is named after Vernon, because these were super wealthy people, but they built so much of the area. And as our latest argument on what constitutes economic growth, it's that flow of money. It's not the hoarding. It's not the holding on to assets and buying of gold and property that already exists. It's that building. It's the movement. It's the flow. That is economic growth.
I mean, when you say it like that, it seems quite common sense, doesn't it?
It's obvious, you know.
Growth is building things.
It's obvious, but it's also not obvious, because we're always told growth is the most important thing, but it's never really made clear to us what wealth is. What growth is. What constitutes it. But household spending is like 60 to 70% of GDP. So your spending, that when you go out to the shops, when you go out for a meal, you are directly contributing to economic growth. So the more money you have to go and do that, to go and buy and consume, that is you contributing to economic growth. And although it's smart personal finance to save, like I would always say, save, if you've got some left over, save. That's smart personal finance, but that's not good for economic growth. Yeah. But the problem is if you are so wealthy that any money that you make simply goes into more saving and more hoarding of wealth, that is not economic growth. So that's where the real problem occurs, is that there's so many people in the UK with nothing, and if they were given, say, 20k, they would spend it all. It would all be spent on various different means of consumption. Whereas if I give 20k to Rishi Sunak, that simply goes into buying more stocks and shares, more index funds. That's not going into a productive use. And I guess you could say, well, investing in companies is a productive use of money, but that's for another time.
Yeah. So I did have some other creative ways where you could maybe incentivize ultra wealthy to pay the taxes. So I thought maybe you could have a pub with subsidised pints. I thought that would go down very well and make you very popular.
That's bread and circuses, isn't it? Yeah. Because there's this idea that, so in Rome, in ancient Rome, the gladiator fights, before gladiator fights, bread would be given out to all the peasants, because they noticed that entertainment, so the gladiator events and the circuses, combined with food, was a great way to quell public anguish or public anger. Right? It's been known for a long time that by ultra wealthy people, historically, that you can basically maintain social order through redistribution. But it seems to have got to the point where that key point that's held societies in place for long periods of time seems to have been forgotten.
Yeah, I think I remember hearing that it was something along the lines of, after the British royal family saw what happened to the French royal family, they made several concessions to the people in order to calm it all down, because people would have seen what had happened there and wanted to, and been inspired, I guess. Yeah,
because the French king refused to grant the French Parliament, any clear ways of implementing their desires, whereas the British royal family recognised that if we allow Parliament to at least kind of believe itself to be able to enact some kind of change, we can keep the sort of, and it wasn't open to the working class, but we can at least keep the landed gentry happy because they can pass certain reforms, and it's not just all power concentrated in the hands of the very few.
And which royal family are here now?
Yeah, they persist today, and they continue to try to influence our politics, even though we're always told they don't. And please look at the recent article on how the Prince Charles, when he was Prince Charles, now King Charles, tried to influence NHS policy to get them to spend more money on homeopathic medicine. It's a crazy story, and just shows how the royal family are able to influence UK politics in ways that are not direct, in the same way that he would say just pass policy, but he will influence scientists and policymakers, or the royal family will influence people making policy and scientists to try and pursue their agenda.
All right, so ready to leave it there?
Or did you have any more suggestions for incentivising the...
Yeah, I did. I thought about maybe with food, but it can skew market economics, can't it? If you
With
start,
food- oh, right,
you know,
giving out
like
food.
yeah, big Sunday roast in Piccadilly Gardens. Maybe one day.
Yeah, throwing out bread to people.
Yeah,
I could see the royal family thinking that was some kind of good PR stunt. Prince Andrew doing it, try and reputation wash.
All right, okay. And on that note, I think we'll wrap it up for today. If you're listening to this via wherever you get your audio podcasts, I'd like to say that we're now on YouTube, and if you're on YouTube, thank you for joining us. And also for everyone who has been listening, thank you for the support. It really does mean a lot. And also, please sign the petition. It's very important.
Yeah, this is a situation where also you can sign the petition. You can also email your local MPs and other politicians, and this can have a real impact on someone's life. You know, public pressure can push politicians to make decisions, and if you really want to see that in action, this can do it. You know, hopefully we can really see some change through our actions.
Yeah, and he's a guy from Manchester, so it's important to look after one of our own. All right, thank you very much for watching.
See you everyone.
Or listening.